The passengers of the train were looking impatiently out the windows, waiting to finally see the high-rise buildings and neon advertising signs of the big city. Among the passengers was a girl, for whom the move to the big city was a momentous and long-awaited event. Her name was Caroline. She grew up in a provincial town, and since childhood she dreamed of big city lights, which she saw only on TV. At last the train arrived at the station. Caroline stepped onto the sidewalk and looked around distractedly. The girl had little idea where to go next. Her best friend Grace had moved here a year ago. She left Caroline her address and said that when she decided to move, she would be happy to help her. Caroline had never ridden in a cab in her life, so when she left the building, she stood indecisively wondering what to do next. There were several cabs at a nearby parking lot. The driver of one of them saw a girl with a small suitcase shifting from leg to leg, and immediately realized that she was here for the first time. He wanted to help her, because he knew how difficult it was for a newcomer in the city at first. He went up to her and smiled at her friendly. Then he said his name was Rick and asked if she needed anything. Caroline smiled happily and said she had come to see her friend and that it was her first time in such a big city. Then she handed him a note with the address and Rick offered to take her there. Caroline agreed, and while they were driving the young people got to talking. Rick turned out to be a very pleasant and sociable person. Caroline told him that she came from a small town. Her plans were to find a job and to rent an apartment, but in the meantime, she was going to stay at her friend's place. As every cab driver, Rick had a wide circle of acquaintances. He showed great concern and almost immediately found a job for Caroline in a fashion store. As a farewell, Rick offered to call him any time and handed her his business card. The young woman waved to her unexpected benefactor, who honked his horn and disappeared into the endless traffic. Caroline spent the rest of the day with her friend. Grace was unspeakably happy that Caroline finally got out of the swamp, as she called their hometown. The girls reminisced about their childhood, made plans for the future, and Grace talked about life in the big city. Before falling asleep, Caroline mentally thanked God that she had such a friend as Grace and that he had sent her such a good man as Rick. The next morning the girl went to her first job in her life. It was difficult at first, but luckily she had a good colleague who helped Caroline get used to it quickly. Rick sometimes dropped in on her at lunchtime and they went to a cafe together or just drank coffee in the park. Caroline liked Rick and she was very grateful that he helped her with her work. A few months went by, and one day Rick, hardly able to contain his excitement, told her that one of his regular clients had given him the address of a wealthy businessman who needed a personal driver and a maid. The guy offered to go for an interview together. Caroline thought about it for a while and decided to give it a try. The next day, the young people went to the given address. They saw the house from afar. It stood out even against the background of other respectable houses in the neighborhood. The security guard escorted Rick and Caroline inside, and soon they were talking to the owner of the house. Justin looked about 40 years old, and he gave the impression of a strong and self-respecting man. He gave Caroline an attentive look and asked her and Rick a couple of routine questions. After that, he told them about the working conditions and said that if they agreed, they could start tomorrow. Rick and Caroline liked the high wages and the new employer, so they accepted without hesitation. Rick was to be the driver of a luxury car, and Caroline was to clean and help in the kitchen in her spare time. They were offered servants' quarters to live in. Weekdays stretched on, resembling each other like twin brothers. Caroline liked the job. First of all, she had been accustomed to housework since she was a child. And secondly, everything in the house almost screamed of luxury and wealth, and the girl loved taking care of expensive things. They literally caused a thrill in her heart. And thirdly, Justin began to make the girl stand out of all the servants and often made her small gifts and signs of attention. Rick did not like it. He suddenly found himself feeling jealous. The man realized that he and Caroline were only friends, but his heart flatly refused to understand it. Soon there was talk among the staff about an affair between Caroline and Justin. But Rick thought they were just gossip until one day he saw Caroline coming out of Justin's bedroom in the morning. He jumped out of the house to expose his heated face to the cool morning breeze. Rick didn't know why he felt so bad. But it was all due to his sincere feelings for Caroline, which he had been hiding in himself as best he could all this time. And meanwhile, the romance between the maid and the master was growing stronger and stronger. And she was no longer a maid. Justin really fell in love with Caroline and proposed to her. Rick suffered and even limited his communication with Caroline. But soon events occurred that put these worries aside. Rick's mother ended up in the hospital. Doctors made a very disappointing diagnosis: cancer. Now all of his salary and savings were spent on the treatment of his beloved mother. Caroline changed a lot after her marriage to Justin. She began to look down on Rick and practically ignored him. Even with her friend Grace, she stopped communicating as well. It's hard to say what was in her heart. Maybe she was just embarrassed about her friends from her former normal life. Meanwhile, Rick's mother's condition worsened and she urgently needed a large sum of money for treatment at a good clinic. In desperation, the young man asked to borrow money from Justin, but was refused. From the staff, Rick knew that Caroline was picking out a brand new car. And then the guy, embarrassed and blushing, told Caroline about his mother and asked for money, promising to pay back with interest. But Caroline refused too, saying she had nothing. Rick had tears in his eyes at the awareness that Caroline had lied to him and so repaid him for his help at the beginning of her journey in the city. Caroline bought a car a few days later. And Rick decided to take out a bank loan at high interest rates. But unfortunately, while he was looking for money for treatment, the disease quickly progressed and the unfortunate woman died the same day her son took out a loan. The man tearfully clutched the money in his hands, which could no longer help his dearest person. The funeral and the loss of his mother marred Rick's life for many months. He quit his job and found work as a simple truck driver. Nothing reminded him of his grief or Caroline on his long journeys. And time passed, making adjustments to people's destinies and filling them with unpredictable events. A year later, Justin said he wanted Caroline to give birth to an heir. But the desired pregnancy never came. Over time, this increasingly irritated Justin, who openly called his wife infertile. The man began to afford to go out with even younger mistresses. One evening, when Justin brought two young beauties to the house, the woman decided to clarify the relationship once and for all. In response to her reproaches, her husband stated that he regretted that he had gotten mixed up with a penniless and useless ragamuffin and that he was fed up with her. That is why he is going to file for divorce tomorrow and let Caroline not count on anything, as she is not entitled to anything by the marriage contract. Caroline tried to argue with him. And then Justin simply threw the woman out into the street, strictly ordering the guards not to let her near the house. Caroline had no choice but to go to her friend's house. Grace was very surprised to see her on the doorstep of her house. But she had a kind soul and took her former friend in. Devastated and penniless, Caroline cried for days, regretting her failed marriage. Only now she realized how selfish she had been to the people who loved and cared for her. Grace forgave her friend and hoped that this situation would teach her a lot. Caroline had to start her life all over again. As before, she began living with Grace and took a job as a waitress. In time she forgot about life with her rich husband and was even glad that she saw his real attitude toward her in time. One afternoon, Rick and a young girl came into the cafe where she worked. Caroline was still very ashamed of her petty behavior. In addition, unexpectedly for herself, jealousy pierced her heart. She asked her colleagues to replace her for an hour, so that Rick did not notice her. But in the evening her cell phone rang and she heard Rick's confident voice. The young man asked how she was doing and why she was working as a waitress. Caroline burst into tears and told everything. 20 minutes later, Rick was already at her house, hugging the crying woman. In spite of everything that had happened, he loved her very much, and that was why he forgave her. And the girl, Caroline saw him with, was his own sister. People say, it is impossible to enter the same river twice. But Caroline and Rick decided to try to start their relationship from scratch, leaving selfishness and betrayal behind. No one knows in advance how their life together will be. What is clear is that everyone has learned a good lesson from their past, especially Caroline. Dear friends, I hope you enjoyed the story. Please write in the comments if you think you can forgive someone like Caroline. Have a good day and see you all again.